Our next storyteller I would like to bring up to the stage is Clay Hurtubise.
Pete, Mitch, and I arrived at Devil's Tower mid-morning. This is the Devil's Tower in northern Wyoming, the one that was in that famous movie with the aliens. Anybody remember that one? With the mashed potatoes and everything? Close Encounters. Yeah, that's the one. It's 900 feet tall. The forecast was for a warm and sunny day and a warm evening. If we could all have jobs that were 50% right and still get paid, would be awesome. And so unfortunately, a large group arrived right before us, and they were tediously slow. And this was really setting us back. And we found out why around lunchtime. They were drinking hard booze on a technical climb up Devil's Tower. What's technical? Well, Devil's Tower is straight up. So you're wearing a harness, you're using ropes, you're using devices that you can wedge into rocks for protection, and you tie yourself in. You wear special shoes that are very tight, and they have a special rubber on them, so you can smear against a rock and climb up. So around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they decided they had enough. They're getting a little tipsy, and it's not the place to be tipsy on. And so we were able to pass them. Unfortunately, that meant we got near the summit of Devil's Tower around dusk. And this was in the fall. Pete decided to stay back and prepare the ropes for our descent. We tied 2 150-foot ropes together so that we wouldn't have to stop as frequently. Mitch and I went to the summit. And the top 60 feet is a freehand scramble, hand over hand, and there's no room for error. On the top, it's kind of bizarre. You feel like you're floating. You're on this grassy field that's actually quite large, and there's no mountains around you. Devil's Tower stands alone. And so while you're up there, you look around, and if you look down, it's a free fall no matter what edge you go to. There's no easy way down. There's no railroad or driveway up. And it's kind of like you're Aladdin on his carpet floating through the air. You just feel like it's surreal. And so we go back down to meet Pete, and we go down the first pitch. Each rope length is called a pitch, and we continue on down. And about halfway down, the weather took a tremendous turn for the worse. The temperature dropped about 40 degrees. A huge wind came up, 40, 50 miles an hour, horizontal rain. Now remember, you're on a tower that's straight up, so the rain that's hitting the tower above you is all coming down on top of you. So you're not only getting hit horizontally, you're getting showered upon. And we managed to keep going, and we have 1 pitch to go. And I'm in charge of pulling the rope down. And you have to pull it a particular way so that the knot doesn't get stuck in the carabiner. And a carabiner is an oval ring that has a little clip in it so that when you clip the rope in it, the rope can't pop out. And you use them for everything. You see them on backpacks now, miniature ones, but that's a carabiner. And so I'm pulling it correctly, and it starts coming down. And then we think because of the high wind, it got stuck. And that's not uncommon in rock climbing, and generally a couple of flicks of the rope will free it. Well, half hour goes by, and hypothermia is setting in, all 3 of us, and the jokes have stopped, and it's starting to get serious. And I continue for another half hour, so a total of an hour. Well, it turns out our drunken buddies who had gone down reported us as missing to search and rescue. And this truck pulls up with a flatbed and a World War II era spotlight on the back with its own generator. And they fire it up, and we can hear them perfectly. And it literally lights up the side of Devil's Tower. And we're smack in the middle of that light. And we're waving and we're hollering. We're like, oh, we're saved, we're saved. And we can see them and hear them, but they can neither hear or see us. It's like turning your high beams on in a snowstorm. All you get is that reflection back. So all they saw was rain. They couldn't even see Devil's Tower. And we could hear them say, well, this is no use. And we hear them shut the generator off and the light just slowly dies out. And we're back in the pitch dark and the high winds and the high rain. And we hear the doors close and they drive away. And that's when things got very quiet. And so I go back to flicking the rope. And after about a half hour, I believe it was Mitch, who said, just stop. Because he and Pete, and pretty much I along with them, realized we were going to die on the side of Devil's Tower. The three of us, tied up on ropes. Now Pete and Mitch were standing on a ledge about that wide and holding onto a sling that they had secured into the rock. So it was hard for them just to maintain their balance through all this, especially when your hands are becoming clubs due to the hypothermia. Mitch could no longer talk. Pete could talk, but not very well. And I was off to the side. And when Mitch said, just stop. But I'm a stubborn SOB, and I don't listen well. And so I kept flicking the rope and flicking. Half hour goes by, nothing. Approaching another hour mark, and I just can't do it anymore. And it's awful to have to give up and realize what the consequences of that action will be. And so I just give it one last heavy flick, and the rope comes crashing down on top of us. Pete and I decided we had to send Mitch down first because he was in severe shape. He couldn't do anything with his hands. And normally you tie yourself in, it's a 2 to 3 minute process. And it took Pete and I about 15 minutes to tie Mitch in. And we knew what that meant. And when you go rappelling down, you're perpendicular to the rock. So you lower yourself to a 45 degree angle, and then you kind of walk down. And you control the rope with one hand. But Mitch had a lot of trouble because of the hypothermia. He couldn't control the rope well. So it took him a really long time to get down. And when he got down, it was Pete and I. Well, Pete wore contacts and glasses in order to see. And the rain was so intense, I could tell he couldn't see anything. And I said, you have to go next. And again, it took us about 15 minutes to tie Pete in. And to this day, I don't know whether he actually said it or it was in my head. But when he was perpendicular to the rock and just going out of sight, I remember him looking up at me. We made eye contact, and he said goodbye. He knew, and I knew, that I would not be able to tie myself in. So he goes down. It takes him quite some time. And then I'm there alone on Devil's Tower. High winds, high rain. And this weird sensation comes over me. If any of you have ever, well, I'm guessing you have, taken a shot of whiskey, and you get that nice warm feeling that just kind of courses through your body, you know, and it's just a really nice feeling. That happened to me on the side of Devil's Tower. And all of a sudden I felt very content, and all I wanted to do was go asleep. And I didn't mind the position I was in. I was fine. Just let me sleep. But I knew from being a mountaineer that that's the warning sign of hypothermia's last hold on you, that if you give in to that, there's no coming back. And so I fought with all my strength, and I would grab it with my club hand, the rope, and I'd put it in my mouth, and I'd grab some more until I had enough to kind of whip around this loop. And I put the top of the loop in my mouth, and I put the carabiner between my harness and Devil's Tower. And I used my left club hand to keep the gate open. And I waited for the wind to subside, Because what my plan was to drop the rope and hope that it goes in. And this was a one-chance deal because I had neither the strength nor capability to pull that rope up a second time. And so the wind subsides, and I drop it, and it goes right in the carabiner, and I release the gate. And then I'm able to make my way down. And it takes me about a half hour, what would normally be 5 minutes. And we get down there, and we're in the parking lot. We're holding each other, keeping our fist under each other's armpits to try to warm our fist up. And we walk across the way to a men's room that had like 6 hand dryers in there. And we have them all going, and we're trying to warm our hands up and get warm. And Pete suggests, hey, let's go into town and get some pizza and beer. And I was all for it. And normally Mitch would be too. And but he was very subdued. And he goes, no, this was divine intervention. And Pete looks at him and says, no, this was Clay's persistence. And there's no divine intervention. But we couldn't convince Mitch otherwise. And so there was no pizza and beer that night. We never talked about that night amongst ourselves ever. I didn't talk about it to another person for probably close to a decade. Mitch would never climb again. His short, tragic life ended with him being devoted to the Mormon Church. Whereas Pete and I, we enjoy pizza and beer to this day.